So, and everyone should feel free to zell me at any point during the show if you'd like. So, a fantastic discussion, and really I do think peer-to-peer, the migration of peer-to-peer, the entry of more companies into the peer-to-peer marketplace is something that we all need to watch very closely. So we're grateful to Lou for giving us that insight and giving us some things to think about. So from banks to processors and ISVs, as Lou mentioned, the payments industry is really looking to distributed ledger, to blockchain, for potentially other ways to disrupt the technology that underlies everything that we do. So our next keynote session looks at what the blockchain and distributed ledger means to the payments industry. You know, as a trade association, ETA is looking closely at how these services will impact the payments industry and ETA member companies. We're also keeping an eye, of course, on strategic issues that the industry will need to address if these technologies are going to be adopted. But we need to talk about it a little bit more. We need to learn exactly what it means to take a block and chain it to another block. I assume that's how it works. Well, let's find out how it works, okay? Dave Birch. Many of you know Dave. Many of you have followed Dave on Twitter for some very introverted commentary on what's going on in the payments industry. Dave Birch of Consult Hyperion is truly one of my favorite people in our industry. He is a no-holds-barred analyst of every aspect of what we do, and he's going to lead us on a discussion of blockchain and distributed ledger with some expert panelists from our industry. You may not even know companies on the show floor have blockchain and digital ledger experts in-house or looking at these issues today. So Dave Birch is going to lead our discussion. He's an author, an advisor, and most of all, a commentator on digital financial services. He's going to be the moderator of what's going to be a fascinating keynote discussion. And it is my pleasure to ask you to join me in welcoming Dave Birch. Hello, Dave. Welcome. Annie. All right, Guillaume.
That's great. Thank you very much for that very generous introduction, Jason. Yes, so we're going to spend a few minutes talking about, I'm reluctant to keep using the word blockchain. So before I introduce you, can I just make a little rule? Okay, so, and this is because I'm a big nerd and these things are like a dagger in my heart when people don't disagree. So please only say blockchain when you mean a blockchain, okay? So because these are smart people and they don't like the generic use of the word blockchain to mean any one of a spectrum of possible shared ledger technologies, including things that aren't even shared ledgers like hash graphs. So just little rule, I hope you're all okay with this, only use the word blockchain when you actually mean a blockchain. Okay, are we, okay. Okay, good, come to it. So when Jason asked me to chair the panel, I thought an interesting way of setting it up would be, and I know they won't like me for characterizing them in this way, but I thought we want to talk about like the real infrastructure of the future, not the stupid Bitcoin stuff that everybody was talking about yesterday, but the real infrastructure of the future. And so I thought it would be good to have what I regard as like the paragons of the existing infra, I don't want to say legacy because I don't mean it like that, but first data are how all this stuff works at the moment. So I thought we'll have somebody from like the way things work now who's looking at blockchain, and then we'll ask like who I regard as an example of the next generation infrastructure, which is Ripple. So, and I'm so happy that these guys agreed to come along here because they do represent the two different perspectives on this. So thanks very much for coming along. So I'm just going to ask them to quickly introduce themselves and just tell you where their perspective comes from, and then we're going to get the discussion going. So Kim, do you want to go first? Just explain to people. You don't need to tell them what first data is.
Okay.
But if you could just explain who you are, that would be great.
Sure. My name is Guillaume Lebleu. I'm part of the digital solutions group at First Data. We're serving our large merchants with supporting solutions for them, like typically like wallet applications, type applications. As part of that, I'm leading a team as a director of engineering focused on infrastructure for this group, and very active in R&D around distributed ledger and wallet services.
And I just would say, before people think you're just some kid who's new to all this stuff, You've been on the innovation side of payments for quite a long time.
Right.
So let's not embarrass each other by saying how long, but
yeah.
Time. Okay. So by the way, as a benchmark of innovation, when he didn't like money, like how money worked, he just started his own. Who used Bernal bucks? Anybody from San Francisco use Bernal bucks? He invented Bernal bucks. I mean, that's pretty, like if you don't like money, I just bitch about it. He didn't like money, he started his own money, Bernal bucks. That's a benchmark, I think. Sorry, Emmy, I think you might need to spend a couple of minutes.
Sure.
Like, they know what First Data is, but I don't think they know what Ripple is. So
Okay.
could you just give them a couple of minutes
Yeah.
on you and Ripple?
Sure.
Thanks.
My name is Amy Yoshikawa, and I come from a company called Ripple. For those of you who are not familiar with Ripple, Ripple is an enterprise blockchain software company based in San Francisco. And we basically develop
Is it really a blockchain?
yeah,
Or is
that's right.
It's a distributed fault-tolerant
Well,
Santin.
kind of depends on the definition of
Yeah,
blockchain,
okay.
but if you are kind of stuck on the kind of narrow definition of blockchain, maybe we will say, yeah, we are
Shared ledger
distributed shared ledger company.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
yeah, that will do too.
Right.
Yeah, and so today, basically, our mission is to enable the Internet of Value. Because of the internet, now today you can send data or information to anybody around the world instantaneously, almost for free. But when it comes to money, particularly across borders, it still takes like several days to settle, and it's very expensive. So our goal is to really make money move just like data does. So today we are working with more than 100 financial institutions to help them improve the cross-border payments.
So just to make, so this isn't kids messing around, right? This is serious, big
Serious.
business. So who are the kind of banks that you're working with?
Yeah.
In this space?
So today we are working with banks like Santander, Standard Chartered, American Express.
So if we just pick one example, Santander,
Yes,
because I know that
Santander.
was in
Yeah,
the
we
news.
just did a big news last week.
So,
Santander.
well, I saw it on Twitter anyway.
Oh yeah.
So if you just, that's a good example, right?
Yeah.
Because that's a new, so can you just explain what you're doing with Santander?
Yes. So Santander has been our early supporter. We've been working together for over 2 years or so. They also invest in us. Basically, they recently announced the launch of a new payments app powered by Ripple's distributed ledger technology called OnePay FX, which allows Santander's customers to be able to send instant payments across borders, like from UK to continental Europe or US. Previously, it took several days to settle, and also was very expensive, and there was no visibility into the payment status. Once you send money, you don't know when it arrives or where. Sometimes the payments could get stuck in the middle, but you have no way of knowing unless you call up the bank. But this app basically provides a complete visibility. So even before you make payments, you know how much it costs and what's the effect cost. And also, you know exactly when it will arrive. It will basically instantaneous. So right now they are starting with Europe and US, but they also have a big customer base in Latin America. So they are rolling out their services across the world.
So this is practical on the ground change.
It is.
It means you can now send money, and it genuinely is instant.
It is.
From England to Colombia or wherever.
Yeah. So
If you need
Latin
in a
America
hurry.
will be later stage, but it will be
Perfect. Okay, so let's talk about, so that's one really good example. So give us you don't have to give away any kind of trade secrets, but give us an idea of some of the areas that you're beginning to explore in this space.
Right.
I mean, this isn't about taking Bitcoin in your Clover terminals.
Right. So I mean, we have some history of accepting Bitcoin through a subsidiary gift since about 2013.
Oh, I forgot that. You bought Gift.
2014.
Yeah.
Right. But we quickly started to look at use case outside of cryptocurrencies. I think right now the two use cases that my team is very interested in is how to facilitate loyalty tokens, rewards tokens, acceptance across a variety of merchants, and solving some of the cross acceptance problem. The other topic, which is kind of a non-payment aspect that we are interested in, is identity and how to use leverage verified claims anchored in some type of immutable system to improve how quickly we can onboard merchants or how we can verify transactions, such as claims such as, for instance, I'm over 18, or I'm entitled to this particular type of transaction. So these are
why would you do that with a blockchain rather than just like a database or an Excel spreadsheet or something?
Well, I think a lot of this idea of everybody today in the industry is doing their own KYC and or they're outsourcing their own KYC to a firm. So there's an opportunity to provide a more decentralized, distributed, shared system that a community of parties can work together. So say in my wallet, I have a claim that tells me I'm over 18. I can anchor a proof of that on a shared system that another party, another bank, or another merchant can verify that way. I think it doesn't have to be necessarily a blockchain. It has to be a shared system, and then when it becomes a shared system, becomes, well, what's the governance, who owns it? And so quickly you get into, well, we probably need some kind of replicated system. I generally don't talk about blockchain. I talk more about replicated ledger. And
replicated distributed ledger.
Right. This really means
decentralized, replicated, distributed.
Right. A lot of what we're doing at First Data or in the banking industry is just replicating data.
Yeah.
And so the challenge is when we think about reconciliating payments and things like that, it's all about achieving consistency on replicated data. And I think protocols in this space are, at some point going to replace some of the more ad hoc mechanisms we're doing today.
Let's come back to the non-payment stuff in a moment. I just want to chase Emmy some more on the payment stuff first. So I know people get bored of hearing about this, but I was in Shanghai before Christmas, just for a few days. And it was literally like going on holiday in the future for a few days and then coming back. The whole time I was there. By the way, when you're buying stuff at Starbucks here, and you still, you do. So you see people using cash, which is, you wouldn't see that at home, right? And you see people using cards and still signing for them, which is, in Shanghai, I never saw anybody use a card, never mind use cash. Like everybody I saw, even when I got a Coke out the Coke machine, I did it using Alipay. Like nobody uses cards, nobody uses cash. The Chinese central bank have said they have a 10-year plan for getting rid of cash. It seems to me that your partnerships cover Asia as well, right?
Yes.
It seems to me that Asia is like an interesting barometer of where some of this stuff is going. And we read the stuff in the papers about crazy Korean Bitcoin trading and all that sort of thing. Put all that to one side. What's really happening from the Asian perspective? Is the blockchain, the shared ledger, is it serious infrastructure?
It is becoming really, really serious. And actually, the situation is very different from country to country. As you mentioned in China, like Alipay, WeChat Pay, they are so advanced. But because of that, the existing banks are having an increasing sense of crisis and urgency that they have to innovate. But they also, at the same time, they realize that if they just stick with existing old technology, like SWIFT, that was created even before the internet was created, they know they can't compete with those emerging companies. That's why they are really interested in looking at blockchain. And actually, it's actually same with Santander as well. There's a story that the executive chairman of Santander, Ana Botín, she realized that her son was actually using TransferWise to send money instead of.
I know, I use TransferWise all the time.
Right.
It's great,
so
isn't it?
she was shocked. Oh, our families using, the competitors' services. That's really.
2 points. First of all, Ana Botín is an extremely smart woman.
Yes.
So you have to take what she says really seriously.
Yes.
I do. But there's that point about TransferWise. I mean, this is a bit of nerdism that you won't care about, but TransferWise is a really important company. TransferWise is the first non-bank to have access to the UK Bank of England clearing and settlement system. Yeah. So the law has changed in the UK to allow non-banks to have access to settlement in central bank funds using these pre-funded settlement accounts.
That's right, yeah.
And TransferWise is the first company to take advantage of that. So they are another little window into the future as well, in my opinion.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
So one thing is this increasing sense of urgency and the crisis is just one thing. Second thing, particularly in Japan, actually Japan is a very, very cash-oriented society.
Surprisingly.
surprisingly, yeah, people think we are kind of advanced, but basically, by the way, I come from Japan, but the percentage of digital payments of all the transactions is actually only 19%. So it's actually kind of national agenda to increase digital payments. And the government encourage banks to innovate so that they can increase digital payments ratio. So now what we are doing in Japan is we created a consortium of more than 50 banks to come together to develop a completely new payments platform or infrastructure powered by Ripple's distributed ledger technology, which basically replaced the existing domestic payments system called the Zengin system, and also can be applied for cross-border payments as well.
And that contrasts with Zelle, which is a fantastic enterprise.
Exactly.
It's built on the existing rails.
Existing rails, yeah, that's right, exactly.
Okay, so let's just, one more thing about that, because I do think we have to take the learning from Asia quite seriously in this space. I just make one little point about you've used China as the example. One of the things that bothers the Chinese banks isn't really, because they're losing so much share to Alipay and WeChat, it isn't really that they're losing transaction revenues. They have that kind of factored in. Everybody knows that the long-term payment revenues go to zero. Everybody knows this. But they lose the data, and that's the big problem, right? So they don't see what the customers are spending the money on, and it's the loss of data that really bothers them. And this leads me to suspect, I'm just testing the idea out on you, but it leads me to suspect that I wonder if there isn't the really big infrastructural play is around the data and maybe not the actual payment. So in other words, your point about sharing the loyalty and stuff like that, well, there are big plays there that could be made by sharing and using data more effectively, even if the payment revenue goes to zero, right? So it's not just about the payment.
Right, so I distinguish, I think, I mean, we can have definitions, right, about blockchain or ledger, but if we talk about payments, I think I would make a distinction between just moving money, which is...
Well, that's what Ripple does, that's easy, right?
And the payment, which is really about conducting a transaction. I'm actually exchanging a financial asset for typically a real asset, a real goods or services. And that includes a complete life cycle, right? That's where I think the credit card agreement, even if you start to think about the credit card agreement as a smart contract that would need to support a lot of other things than just moving the money, such as disputes, for instance, or warranties, or receipts. So I think if we start thinking about distributed ledger as a way to handle the overall process of conducting a transaction over its entire life cycle, and then we start to think about, well, where is it most useful, as you just said, right? I think, to me, one area that seems very promising is dispute management. Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's a conflictual area.
I mean, it's boring to me, but I mean, to these people, it's lifeblood. So you need to.
Right.
So why would something like dispute management make sense on a blockchain?
We just said blockchain, by the way.
Yeah, no, I'm using it specifically.
Well, on a blockchain, I don't know, on a distributed system, that participants to that ecosystem can have replicated data instead of having to go to a central party that will maintain the state of that dispute. I think would have value in terms of authority and trust. And then being able to create a marketplace of participants to evaluate the dispute, to resolve it, a variety of parties on a global basis, potentially. I think these are areas where leveraging the technology could benefit.
What do you think of this? I mean, it's like a lot of the things that end up being the really big business are the things that are quite unglamorous. So the guys on the Bitcoin panel yesterday were talking about overthrowing the Federal Reserve and all this sort of thing, starting a new country on an island and stuff like that. But actually, the way of the world is that the big business, you know, it's going to be this mass market, unglamorous, warranty management, receipts. It's going to be that sort of stuff, isn't it? That where the shared ledger makes a big difference to the average consumer, to the average person in this world.
The way I think about it is that the business is created around friction, right? So if distributed ledger creates less friction on some parts of our processes, it will, or new areas will emerge where there is friction. For distributed ledger, the way you interact with the ledger is a point of friction for the user today. Key management, just handling the user interaction with this system is a point of friction. Another point of friction is interoperability between the old and the new, right? You can use Ripple, you can use any kind of ledger. At some point, you may have to actually go back to another traditional rail. How you manage that handoff. These are places where I think there will be opportunities for friction. Another one is bringing real-world data inside the ledger, right? So when the ledger is kind of like an ideal place, that's perfect. That's like a crypto-anarchist, libertarian ideal place. But when you start to connect it to the real world with real users, real merchants, real goods and services, real inventory, that's where you get into problems. So to me, all the opportunities are at the periphery of that ledger ecosystem.
He's got a point, hasn't he, Amy? Because I think for a lot of the users, like the users of the Santander system, they don't really know that it's, whether it's chains of blocks or Byzantine fault tolerant. Right. They don't know if it's any of those things.
Yeah, it's all
and actually,
under the kind of priming.
You suspect for a lot of the people in the audience, what they'll see is an improved service, a better way of doing these things. The fact that it's implemented using a blockchain, I'm not sure if that's a big deal. I mean, it's become a bit of a marketing buzzword, hasn't it, really? Not for you, but for,
not for us.
Like that. So if we look at what the consumer sees at the end of it, where do you think the sort of consumer revolution will be? What will consumers see that's different when you guys have succeeded in using this new technology to power the infrastructure? What do consumers see that's different? You've already said speed is one of the things.
And also cost and visibility. So visibility, because right now when you want to send money like through SWIFT, it's basically that SWIFT was built before the internet was created. So it's a payments messaging system is just one directional. Once you send the data or payments instruction, you have no way of kind of keep track of it. Well, they try to improve it now, but it's more of a marginal improvement. So being able to know how much exactly it costs to send money from one place to the other, having that visibility actually increase competition, the payments. So we believe that cost of sending international payments will gradually come down. So that's a very important thing. And also certainty of settlement is also important. Right now, at the bank, hundreds of thousands of people working on the reconciliation of payments. Sometimes payments can fail. I hear more than 6% of the international payments fail because of a lack of necessary information or some data reconciliation problem. So that can completely reduce the operational cost.
So that transparency point, I think, might be. I think people might underestimate the impact of this, because certainly I feel from some of the work we've done in the space with the acquirers, looking at what the opportunities might be, it's not absolutely obvious that it's going to be that much cheaper in many cases. It's not absolutely obvious it's going to be that much faster in many cases. I mean, you're comparing it with hopelessly inefficient. But in the UK, people can send money to each other through the bank, and it's it's seconds. But this point about opacity, I think, is underestimated. The fact that you have this kind of multi-party system where people can see the state, they can see the history of the changes. So you remove a lot of the asymmetric information problems that you get in real businesses. I wonder if that could be a really big impact. Just the fact that it's more transparent. You have these concepts of ambient accountability that are built around what people call the triple entry systems. Is it possible that maybe it's something like that which is going to be really transformational?
Well, maybe we have to look a little bit further than transparency, because what does transparency actually mean for people? I think ultimately it's going to mean like a better sense of maybe of ownership and control. If you think about, if you own any sort of loyalty, let's call it tokens, right? Just to make the parallel, like if you own any sort of loyalty token, your sense of ownership is usually is not very strong. Like when you try to redeem them or if you want to sell them, you feel like you're in a very constrained environment. Whereas if you own a ERC20 token on Ethereum,
I think you stepped over the line
right?
With just like pull back a little
you can
bit.
just sell it at any time as long as there is another party willing to do that. So I think the sense of ownership to me is what's going to come out of this transparency you're talking about, whether it's about personal data or about my financial assets or about a particular particular contract that I'm participating in, like a warranty or a dispute.
Can I say one more thing about this? It might not be clear to the people in the audience what you're talking about. I mean, I know that's generally true, but specifically about tokens. So the idea of having these data objects that are moving around on top of the shared ledger, the tokens, sounds like this really kind of esoteric thing that's linked only with ridiculous scams, right? So because all you ever read about tokens is about these amazing scams, right? Some of them are amazing. You've got to take your hats off to some of these people. But I was on stage with a guy called Jonathan Larson, who's head of corporate venture capital for Ping An at Money 2020 in Asia a couple of weeks ago. And he's a super smart guy. He's like trillions of dollars. Ping An actually built their own blockchain because they weren't happy with other people's. So and he's not a tech guy. He's a straight out business guy. And I tried the token question on him to see what happened. And he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but only very slightly, he said, when the token markets are properly regulated, we're going to tokenize everything. So it was very clear from the big financial institution point of view, you're absolutely right. It's tokens rather than the underlying cryptocurrencies, which are going to be the utterly transformational thing in this space.
Well, and the tokens you're referring to right now are security tokens, where there is an assumption of profit and effort from the party, right? But there's other kinds of tokens that don't have these characteristics, right, that can be used today.
That's true, but if you look at where tokens are going in the future,
right.
If we look at the shared ledger as a means for ensuring the underlying security, so then you have these tokens which you can now trade without clearing and settlement, or people, the digital bearer instruments we used to call them in the old days. You have markets which are fantastically more efficient. They're inevitably going to be cheaper, which goes to your point about this again. So I think if I wanted to like push you into pointing to one or two areas, again, we understand that things are going to change in payments because of the speed and transparency and stuff like that. But I just want to push you a little bit harder on the non-payment stuff, just to give people in the audience some ideas where there might be other business possibilities in this space. So pick something other than payments where I can tell from Guillaume, he thinks the identity stuff is going to be the big stuff, and I'm sympathetic to that. How about you? What are the non-payment things you're looking at?
What really fascinates me about is this personal credit scoring area. Like in China, like Alipay, WeChat have such, as you mentioned earlier, have access to such a vast, huge amount of data. And then based on that, they basically do kind of social personal scoring. And then based on that, they basically provide additional services like lending services and so on. Now, the Chinese government is actually trying to kind of take it over and then try to make it more accessible by other financial institutions, so that those.
Have you heard about this? This is actually true. This is, so basically, if you're an arsehole, so you start off with like a personal score, like your credit score, and if you do arsehole things, it gets like marked down. And then you get to the situation where if you're a big enough arsehole, you can't book a plane ticket, you can't book a train ticket. Yeah. You have to have a score above, what is it, 700 or something?
Right.
So they don't call it an arsehole score, they call it something else.
Anyway.
But
there is definitely.
But this is really happening.
Yeah. And then there is a fight between like these big companies and the government. Government is also trying to acquire the data. But then, is that the only option? Like, it's the data is actually our own data. And then blockchain really kind of brings the data to the ownership of yourselves and the consumers. And I think there are a lot of challenges to get there. But then I think the use of blockchain in this personal credit scoring could be a very interesting area to watch.
So if you're an asshole now, you're an immutable asshole.
You can't manipulate, yeah.
Listen, guys, I want to say thank you very much for joining in the discussion. I have to say to everybody here, they didn't know what questions I was going to ask them. You got honest opinions from people who really know this topic inside out. Take the time to come and meet them afterwards and join me in thanking them in the traditional fashion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.